Wonder what would be your reaction if a garage mechanic from Wigan arrived in Trafalgar Square and claimed to be God. Would you be convinced? I have the feeling he'd be put under a social worker at the least, probably recommended to a psychiatrist, and if he was causing a considerable disturbance of the peace, he'd probably be taken into custody. I had a letter a few months back from a man who said this. He lived in the Midlands, and he wrote like this. He said, I bought a tape of yours recently because I thought you were a pop singer. But he said, all that was on the tape was words, and I was bored stiff. But he said, I just wanted to write and let you know that I am the one you were talking about. I am the Christ. I am the Messiah. And he spent 14 pages telling me this. What's your reaction to that? Well, 2,000 years ago, a village carpenter from an obscure Mediterranean country actually made that claim. And I want you to realize how difficult it was for people then to be convinced. Yet now, 2,000 years later, 1,500 million people are convinced that that village carpenter was telling the truth, and they now worship him as God. That makes him pretty unusual. And we are going to spend these talks looking at the uniqueness of Christ. Let's begin by looking at something he said less than 24 hours before his body lay cold in the grave. It was the night before he died. He knew he was going to die, and he was comforting his friends. They should have been comforting him, but he was comforting them. And this is what he said. He said, don't let your hearts be troubled. You trust in God, then trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. And you know the way to the place where I'm going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? And Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really knew me, you would know the Father as well. And from now on you do know him and have seen him. Philip said, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. And Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip, even after I've been among you for such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you are not my own. Rather, it is the Father living in me who is doing his work. Believe me when I say that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or else believe me on the evidence of the miracles themselves. I tell you the truth, anyone who has faith in me will do what I have been doing. He will do even greater things than these, because I am going to the Father. Now that statement in the middle of that little reading, I am the way, the truth, and the life, is about the most offensive statement you could imagine in today's world. It is considered arrogant, bigoted, and totally unacceptable. And in the first two talks, I want to tell you why. To make such a claim today is considered out of the question. Why should it be? It's the little word the. If Jesus had only said, I am a way, a truth, and a life, that would be totally acceptable, and people would consider it. But when he said the way, and the truth, and the life, the modern mind cannot cope with that. Most religions in the world will accept Jesus. That may come as a surprise to you. Judaism accepts him as a great rabbi. There's been a change in the Jewish mind over the last 20 years. There have been altogether 200 books, poems, and booklets written about Jesus by Jews in the last 20 years. They are now claiming him as one of the greatest Jews that ever lived. Muslims accept Jesus as a prophet, as the second greatest prophet, Muhammad being the greatest in their eyes, but they accept him as a prophet. Buddhists accept Jesus as a teacher, one of those who's had insights into life and shared them with us. Hindus accept Jesus as a manifestation of deity, one among many. But if you call him a something, that is acceptable. Call him the something, and that is now totally unacceptable. People will accept Jesus as a superstar, but there are other superstars. Actually, one of the titles of Jesus in the Bible is the bright morning star. Do you know what that means? Have you ever been up early enough to watch the stars go out? And finally, when all the stars have disappeared and the sun is just about to come up and the sky is light, there is always one star low down near the horizon that is still shining. That's the bright morning star. And the Bible claims that when all the other stars have gone, when all the pop stars and film stars have disappeared, there'll be one star still shining, and that will be Jesus. But that is offensive. A superstar, yes. But the bright morning star, no. The way, no. The truth, no. The life, no. Put him among others, yes. Put him by himself, no. Now, our subject is the uniqueness of Christ. There is a sense in which every person is unique, something to do with our genes. There is no one else just like me. Perhaps my wife is very thankful about that. There's no one else just like you. You are unique. Your makeup, your physical makeup, your temperamental makeup makes you special. You are unique. There is only one of you. But that's not what we mean when we say Jesus was unique. Then we also use the word of unusual people. We say he's a unique this, that, or the other. She's a unique this, that, or the other, meaning they are extraordinary, out of the ordinary, unusual. But that's not what we mean when we say Jesus is unique. When we say he is unique, we mean he stands alone. You cannot put him alongside anyone else. You can't compare him with anyone else. He's in a category on his own. He is unlike every other human being. Now let's spell out in what way this concept is so difficult for the modern world. In the 6 talks I want to give, the first 2 will be spent on looking at how people think today and why it is such an offense to them to claim that Jesus is unique. In the next 2 talks, talks 3 and 4, I want to look at the public ministry of Jesus, the 3 years when he was in full view of the public, when they looked at him, listened to him, watched him, talked about him, discussed him, and see just what kind of an impact he made on the people who knew him. And then in the last 2 talks, I will come finally to the 2 facts which make Jesus absolutely unique and different from everyone else who has ever lived. I begin then with the first part of his statement, I am the way. And the word the is an exclusive word. He is saying, I am the only way. Now let's see why that is so offensive. There has been a huge change in our society, especially in Britain in the last 50 years. Years ago, every nation, every state had its own God and its own religion. And when you were born into a nation, you were born into that religion. So if you were born in this country, you were a Muslim. If you were born in that country, you were a Hindu. If you were born in the other country, you were a Buddhist. If you were born in England, you were expected to be a Christian. This was true of most of human history, that every nation had its own religion and its own God. Jeremiah the prophet, speaking to Israel, says, have you ever heard of a nation that changed its God? Yet my people Israel have changed their God. What an extraordinary thing. because the ancient world never heard of a nation changing its religion. And though there might be ethnic minorities living in each nation, every state had its own dominant religion, and national affairs were geared to that religion. That is why, until recently, this country was called a Christian country. And the dominant faith here was Christianity. And our national events, like the coronation and the opening of Parliament, were geared to Christianity. That was the religion of this country. There may have been Jewish minorities or Hindu minorities, but the overall religion was clear. Now that has totally changed. With emigration and immigration, other religions are now on our doorstep. You may find yourself living next to a Hindu or a Muslim or a Sikh. We are faced now with a totally new situation. A friend of mine was ill for some weeks, and because he was a bachelor and looking after himself, his next-door neighbor came in every day with a hot, cooked meal. At the end of his illness, he went next door to thank the neighbor for looking after him so well, and said to his neighbor without thinking, "You know, you've been a really good Christian to me." And the neighbor was furious. He said, "I'm a Muslim. Why did you call me a Christian?" But then the word Christian in England has come to mean for many people a do-gooder, somebody who's kind to grandmother and the cat. And he was just picking that up. But we are now in a missionary situation. Years ago, the Christians of this country sent money and men overseas to persuade people over there to change their religion to what we believed was a superior religion. That was the motivation behind missionary work. And I was brought up to believe that missionary work began south of the Mediterranean. Did you get that impression? Europe was civilized. You had to at least pass Gibraltar before you became a missionary. Missionaries went to the far corners of the world to preach a new religion and persuade people to change. Now the situation has changed. Europe is the mission field of the 90s. I hope you realize that. Europe is opening wide, east and west, to the gospel. Did you know there are more villages in France without the gospel than the whole of the continent of Africa? And many Christians in this country are waking up to the fact that Europe is the mission field we are called to explore in the 90s. Having said that, some Christians are at last beginning to realize that England is a missionary field. And we are faced with a crisis now. We who sent missionaries to other countries to persuade people to change their religion, are we going to do the same thing now that other religions are on our doorstep? Because all of us now are in the position of being a missionary. So we have to face the question, what right have we to say to anyone else, our religion is better than yours? What right have we to persuade them to change their religion? And especially when we discover that many of them are more devout and more pious and more committed in their daily life to their faith than many churchgoers are. So what right have we? When you consider that there are now more Muslims in Britain than practicing Anglicans, you will no longer talk about a Christian England. This is not a Christian country. There are probably only between 2 and 3% of the population who know Jesus Christ personally. And while 2 mosques a week are being opened, one of our major denominations is closing 2 churches per week. So we are in a totally different situation. We are now in a multicultural, multi-faith society. And the word I want to introduce you to, I'm going to introduce you to quite a lot of difficult words in the first 2 talks. They all end with ISM. They're isms, and there are loads of them. And I'm suspicious of every word that ends with ism. Somehow, behind each word that ends with ism, there's a power that gets hold of people and directs their life towards itself. There are only 2 isms I can cope with. Baptism is one, and evangelism is the other. But all the other isms I am wary of, even religious isms, even Catholicism or Protestantism or Anglicanism or Methodism or Calvinism or Arminianism, they all have this unusual power to get hold of people's thinking. But the first one I want to introduce to you is pluralism. It's a word you're going to hear a lot of. It's a philosophy, an attitude, an outlook which says there are many creeds, many cultures, many faiths, and we must learn to live with that fact and accept each other's faith as valid. Or to put it in very simple terms, you will probably hear it put like this: there are many ways to God. Yet Jesus said, I am the way. There's a contradiction here. You can't believe both. You can't believe that he is the way and believe there are many ways to God. You can believe he's a way and there are many ways, but not the way. So we have a crisis on our hands. And because nations had their own gods in the past, most wars were religious wars. Even Saddam Hussein got on his knees and claimed the backing of Almighty God before he invaded Kuwait this week. Religious wars have been strewn through history because each nation had its God, and when nations went to war, one nation prayed to its God and the other nation prayed to its God, and it became a jihad, a holy war between gods. And because of this fact, now that we are so mixed up, even in our own country, and because the world is a global village and we're all having to live together in it, the modern outlook says the only way to have peace is to stop religious arguments and to stop religious strife and to accept each other's way to God as valid and be tolerant of one another and respect each other's religion. That is now the mood of our society for the sake of social unity and harmony and for the sake of world peace. And it's a cry that's not just coming from outside the church, it's coming from inside the church. Dr. Runcie, the Archbishop of Canterbury, gave a memorable lecture in London a year or two back in which he besought us to look for the Holy Spirit in all religions. The Pope called together different religions of the world in Assisi, noted for St. Francis, and the religions of the world came together there to pray for world peace. In other words, there are now such big issues facing us that we can't afford the luxury of arguing about faith or of discussing differences between religion. What we need to do is accept each other's religion and work together for world peace. There is another pressure too on us to bring religions together, and that is the whole question of the environment. We now realize planet Earth is a little spaceship hurtling through space with a limited number of people on board, a limited amount of fuel, a limited amount of oxygen. And here is a cause for which we all need to unite to save planet Earth. Our survival is at stake, not just peace and harmony, but our very survival depends on us coming together. Last year, in 44 cities, Christians marched for Jesus. There has never been such a widespread public proclamation of Christ as last September. In 44 cities, thousands of Christians marched. But there was not a word in the newspapers, there was not a mention on television. It apparently was totally ignored. Something else happened on the same day, which caught the headlines. At Canterbury, not far from here, there was a celebration of the forest. And different religions came together to Canterbury to celebrate the forest on which we depend for our oxygen. That is going to be a trend which will become very much more prominent in the 90s. There will be a pressure on different religions to come together in order to save planet Earth. And the focus of worship will be on a lady who doesn't exist, called Mother Earth and Mother Nature. Mark my words, there will be a revival of the Old Testament fertility cults, the goddess worship of Mother Earth, against which the Old Testament prophets preach so much. But all these pressures in a pluralist society with many creeds and many cultures are wanting us to get together and to say there are many ways to God and each way is valid. Now, there is nothing new in all this. When the Roman Empire was expanding, it faced the same problem. Because as the Roman Empire expanded, it took in more and more nations with different gods. And here was a potential source of division and strife within the empire. So how did they deal with that to bring about the famous Pax Romana, the Roman peace, the harmony within the empire between the different peoples they had conquered? Well, there were two ways in which they tackled the problem. The first was to erect temples to all gods. In other words, to bring the different gods into the same house of worship so that they could all be worshipped together. And the name for all gods in Greek is Pantheon. And the largest such temple was built in the city of Rome in the year 27 BC. It was burnt down less than 100 years later and rebuilt by the Emperor Hadrian. I was walking on top of Hadrian's wall in Northumberland just a week ago today. But Hadrian also built this huge temple in the middle of Rome, and he called it the Pantheon. It was about the size and shape of the Royal Albert Hall, a big oval building. I've only got a photograph here of the ceiling, which is magnificent. It has a great hole in the ceiling through which you can see the sky. I don't know if you can see the ceiling here with the hole to the sky. It is a magnificent temple. It's still standing. If you go to Rome, you must go and have a look at it. I went there in 1947. That was my first visit to Rome. And I wanted to see the Pantheon. I'd heard about this temple in which there were niches for different gods, and all the statues of the gods could be worshipped together. And this would unite the Roman Empire. I walked into the building and got a shock. I expected to see statues of Jupiter and Zeus and all the other. There wasn't one. The temple was empty of the gods. The only religious object that I could see in there was a wooden cross, because the Pantheon is now a church where Jesus Christ alone is worshipped. That left a deep impression on me. I saw it as a parable. I saw it as a symbol of what will one day happen when all the religions of the world disappear, including churchianity, and only Christ is worshipped. Now, that was one way the Roman Empire tried to tackle the problem of having people of different religions living together in harmony. They also did another thing. By the way, before I leave that, I'd better tell you what happened when they met with the Jews. When they conquered Israel, they said, "Give us one of your gods to put in the Pantheon." And that raised a problem. Two problems, in fact. The Jews said, first, we don't have any statues because our God has forbidden us to have a graven image. What? You have no gods? Yes, we have one God. Well, where is he? Let's see him. No, he's invisible. But surely you have a statue of him. No, we don't. Well, that was the first problem. The second problem was, they said, and our God is the only God who exists. He has told us again and again, there is no one beside me. There is no other God. Therefore, even if we had a statue, we couldn't give it to you, because we wouldn't have our God beside others, because there is no God beside our God. Well, now, they got away with it in a very unusual way. The Roman authorities put their heads together and said, we'll register them as atheists because they haven't got a visible God. And because they had no visible God that you could see, the Jews were registered as atheists. And they got away with it. They didn't have to join in all the religious mumbo-jumbo. But the Christians didn't get away with it. They never got registered. They were the underground church. They were the outlawed church. They were the religio illicita, which meant they were an illegal movement. They didn't get registered as atheists like the Jews did. The other thing that the Roman Empire did to unite all these people of different faiths was to invent a new god that they could all worship. And they decided to deify the Roman Caesar. And they began to call the Roman emperor God. And they said, now you can go on worshiping your own gods as much as you want, but in addition, you must be willing to say Caesar is Lord, because that faith will unite us all. That's just what they did. That is why for 300 years Christians were thrown to the lions, burnt alive, tortured. There was one famous case of a dear lady who had just given birth to a baby, and they put her in a cell, and they put her baby in the next cell, and the baby was crying for milk, and they said to the mother, the moment you acknowledge Caesar as Lord, you can go and feed your baby. But she never did. And she and the baby died for their faith. They would not join in either the pantheon of many gods or the worship of Caesar as God. We are going to be under the same kind of pressures as the world shrinks, as the mobility of population puts religions alongside each other. For the sake of unity and harmony, the pressure is on us to say, Jesus was a way. He's not the way. But Jesus said, I am the way. The only way. Which means two things. It means first that you need no one else when you have Jesus. You need no one else. And secondly, more seriously, it means no one else can help you. Or as Peter put it, some weeks after Jesus died, Peter said, there is no other name given among men under heaven whereby we may be saved. Now that's exclusive, and that's offensive. The whole mood of the world at the moment is to take this pluralist society with its many creeds and cultures and do something else with it. I really wanted another word on there, but I didn't give it in time. So you can write it in on your piece of paper. The word is syncretism. That's another horrible word. But it flows from pluralism. A pluralist society with many religions has a pressure within it to syncretize those religions, to bring them together in one. I'm sure you've all heard of the ecumenical movement that seeks to bring the different Christian denominations together, Protestant and Catholic, Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterian, Lutheran, Orthodox, Syriac, Coptic. There is a strong move to bring all those who profess Christ together. But what you may not have realized is that there is now a strong move also to engage in dialogue between different religions and bring them all together. Some of you are old enough to remember an American statesman called John Foster Dulles. He was the first man really to get this going, and in the San Francisco Cow Palace, whatever that is, many years ago there was held the first World Congress of Faiths, and all the different religions sent representatives together so that there could be a united act of worship, and readings were taken from the different scriptures. Part of the Sermon on the Mount was read, part of the Quran was read, part of the Holy Vedas were read, And all these scriptures were read, and then the people all prayed together. And this was the program of a syncretistic move in religion. And that is the move that is now really pressing on us very hard, so that we may be one world with one faith and one religion, a united mankind. I was preaching in a little school in the county of Oxfordshire not long ago, and it's a school right out in the country, and I'm sure there wasn't a Muslim within 50 miles. And yet, in the school hall behind me as I spoke was a wall covered with quotations from the Quran, with pictures of mosques, and a complete wall spread of Islam. And I was preaching Christ in front of this backcloth. On another wall was a complete study of the Judaistic faith. Now listen carefully to what I'm going to say now. There is such a thing as comparative religion, but Christianity is not one of them. For actually, Christianity is not a religion at all. And there are teachers now in this country who are facing this pressure. I have counseled teachers who have lost their job because they have said in the staff room, never mind the classroom, the things that I'm going to teach you today, that Christ is unique. In our children's minds in school is being erected a pantheon, a temple to all gods. Many parents are already troubled and concerned and asking me about their children who are being taught this pantheon. You see, the difficulty is that they are told about different religions, how they worship, their festivals and their practice. They're even encouraged to join in the festivals. But they are never told how to judge the truth of each faith. And that is the key issue behind all religions. Are they true? The word true and the word real are the same word in both Hebrew and Greek. And whenever you see the word truth in Scripture, you can substitute the word reality. Jesus said, the truth will set you free. He was saying, reality sets you free. And the real question we have to ask is, how far do the different faiths correspond with reality, with truth? I'll finish this talk by sharing with you an experience I had in Birmingham University. I was invited to go at rather short notice to take part in the student debate in the debating society, in the debating chamber. And the motion that was proposed was that Jesus is the only way to God. And I was asked to go and propose this motion. When I got there, to my surprise, the opposer of the motion was wearing a clerical collar. And the seconder opposing the motion was wearing a wooden cross around her neck. I thought, where am I? Is this Alice in Wonderland? I am proposing the motion that Jesus is the only way to God. And I'm being opposed by an ordained minister and somebody wearing a cross. Well, it was one of the hottest debates I've ever been in, and for 2.5 hours, that room was hotter than this hall. But at the end of it, a vote was taken, and it was something like 85% favored the motion that Jesus is the only way to God. And the president, the student president, was so surprised by this, so tongue-tied, that he announced the motion had been defeated. There were cries from all over the chamber, carried, carried. And he said, I'm sorry, I never expected a motion like that to be carried in this university. But it was. I'm hoping that that motion will be carried in your heart by these talks. But we've already reached a second subject, and that is, what is truth? And the same Jesus who said, I am the way, immediately went on to say, I am the truth. And we shall look at that in the next talk.